Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Mr. Robot Season 3, Episode 5, Runtime Error. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Mr. Robot, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Mr. Robot up to Season 3, Episode 5. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, okay, this episode was billed as like last week they did this preview for it and they're like, this is the episode that's going to blow you away, everyone's going to be talking about it, it's going to be amazing. Now my first reaction to hearing that was worry, because I'm always worried when something is hyped up that much, because typically not typically, but a lot of times it doesn't, like, because it leaves your expectations so high, it doesn't live up to those expectations, and then it's easier for it to be disappointed when it's really ranked up, especially by a promo, because a promo is always a bit hyperbole. So I tried to manage my expectations and not expect too much, but still I was like, something in the back of my head was like, this commercial is saying this episode is going to be amazing. So I was expecting something amazing, and I was satisfied. I did get something amazing. In this case, having high expectations actually worked. I was completely blown away by this episode. You know, it actually took me like maybe half an hour, 30 minutes in or something before I realized that this was done in a sort of, the cinematography was done in sort of one shot motion. Kind of like the movie Birdman, which I was blown away by Birdman as well. A lot of people said they thought it didn't deserve the Oscar. I'm not one of them. I think it totally did deserve the Oscar. I liked it better than The Revenant. I think that was an amazing movie, and mainly for the way it was shot, because the way it was shot, like, even though it took me a little bit to like consciously or intellectually realize that that's how it was shot, I knew like subconsciously that the way it was shot was really helping the story and making it feel more grand and awesome. And that's why I think that this sort of one shot method actually really works to sort of make things flow. Because I said this in the past in some of my other reviews, where sometimes certain episodes I don't like when they try fancy stuff with the cinematography, because for me cinematography is best when it's not noticed, because if it's too like grand and flashy and does weird shit too much that distracts from the story, then it's actually a bad thing, because you want to actually have it enhance the story, which is what I think it totally does here. Because there are some ways where doing this one-shot method thing does not work and actually distracts from the stories, but when it's done right, it can be a beautiful thing. And I think it was done right in Birdman, and definitely done right here, because Mr. Robot has never had like bad cinematography or bad production. That's one of the consistent, even though the story goes out here and there, one of the consistent things of high quality and Mr. Robot has been the production value, the cinematography, editing, music, and the style to it. That's been consistently excellent throughout the entire series, even when the story dips from time to time. And this is no exception, and the story here is also amazing in the way this is done. And it's very innovative that they actually tried it that way. And of course, the big, promo thing said this is the first time they're going to run it commercial free. Although I watch it on the streaming service in New Zealand legally, I should add that, and there's never any commercials for me anyway, so that didn't affect me. But it was interesting that they put that in the promo for USA in America, and it's because of the one-shot method, that if they sort of cut it up with commercials, that would kind of ruin it. You can't really split commercials into it when you have that one smooth motion. And it was just amazing. Now, intellectually, that it's not actually one shot, but it's just the method, because they use a method like they refer to as invisible cuts, although I always preferred the term magical cuts. That is whenever something like, whenever someone passes right in front of the camera or the camera goes through a wall or something like that, that's when they cut, but then they take up the next shot exactly from where the last shot left off to make it appear like it's all one shot, because they obviously can't actually have one continuous shot for the entire time. Although I think there is precedent for some films doing it for like 16, 20 minutes or whatever, and I'm sure there's some art house, rare, obscure film that actually does a single shot for 2 hours. But typically they use magic cuts, and I have no doubt that that was done here as well. But that's not the point. The point is it appears to be one shot, and that's what makes it so beautiful to watch, and it really enhances the story. And it tells, and it also has the method of in this case telling it in sort of real time, where you don't have any skips or jumps, which is typically what happens in the Mr. Robot episode. Now, that part of it I think is a positive and negative. There's good and bad to that, because on the one hand, it is, as I said, is new and innovative in the way it sort of gets you into these characters' mindsets, and the way it flows is a beautiful thing. But on the other hand, one of the things I do like about Mr. Robot is the weird montages and the editing and going in the overall view, where you visit a lot of different characters in a lot of different time periods, and you go from here to there. And this was a very different feel, and at times it could actually feel a bit too slow, and particularly with the Angela storyline, which I'll get to later. And it doesn't, so it feels like just a snippet, a small snippet in time, where typically an episode of Mr. Robot would cover a lot more ground than this. So I mean, I don't want to mean that to say that as a hugely negative thing. It was just this minor sort of nitpicky, small drawback to it. But overall, like, I was just, at one point in this episode while watching it, I nearly cried. Not because I was sad, just because I was so in awe of how beautiful this whole episode felt. Now, let me get more into the story, because the story was pretty intense and amazing. It's a pretty significant part in the overall story, and oh my God, I'm just blown away by how amazing season 3 is being. So I love the way it starts off with Elliot. Basically, he's really out of it. He doesn't know what's going on. Now, we can extrapolate that he was Mr. Robot up until this point. You can kind of guess that Mr. Robot went with Angela, and they were discussing their plans to get stage 2 going, and they went to E Corp together, and in the elevator he suddenly switched to Elliot, and that's where the episode starts. It starts where Elliot comes in, and you can tell, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I definitely get that impression that Angela looks at Elliot and she could realize that he's Elliot again and not Mr. Robot. Which apparently fucked up their plan. But I'm still kind of curious of why they even let Elliot go to work if they knew he was fired. It seems like, I really don't know anything about the corporate office world and stuff like that. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe they let people come to work even though they know they're fired, so they can show up with a bunch of people and kick them out of the building. I don't know. Maybe that's how it really works. Seems a bit weird to me, but whatever. So anyway, so I get the way it starts, and the way Ellie's completely out of it, like he doesn't remember anything, and it's kind of like, it's like if you went on a really long bender of drinking and drugs and LSD and all this other sorts of crazy shit over a long weekend for like 3 days, and you wake up completely sober and you don't remember anything. You're completely, it's like that movie The Hangover or whatever. You're completely out of it. You have no clue, and that's sort of what's going on here now. So this, and they do imply this several times in the episode going forward, that Mr. Robot had taken over Elliot's body the entire weekend. I'm a bit curious at how he managed to do that. If he just put in the effort to do that, because we know that he's done it in the past, like when the 5-9 hack first happened, for example. Elliot woke up like days later and had no idea what happened. But it's curious that he said recently, though, we've seen the phenomenon where Elliot is coming exerting more control over his body, and he's coming to the surface more often. And that's and we see that when he just pops up with Angela and Tyrell. So it indicates that Mr. Robot doesn't really have control over when Elliot appears. In fact, he outright says this, and yet he seemed to be able to block Elliot out for the entire weekend. I don't know if that's because he put in the effort or whatever, or maybe it's because Elliot's subconscious, even the Elliot part of him, didn't wanted Mr. Robot to take over, which they do hint at, which I think is quite significant later in this episode, where during Elliot's monologuing, he actually says that when he's talking to Darlene that, oh, good thing she doesn't know that I actually miss Mr. Robot and I actually want to see him more. So there's a part of even that persona of Elliot that agrees with what Mr. Robot's saying, but he doesn't want to acknowledge it, but it's sort of subconscious thing. And it gets really complicated, but I totally get it. And I see and I think it brings like a beautiful dynamic to it. And maybe that's why Mr. Robot was able to take over for the long weekend. But anyway, to start, and I love the way they play it with like the sort of crackling with the sound is so well done to show that how out of it Elliot is, and that he gets the call from Darlene and he doesn't really know what's going on, and he even says in the monologue that he's on autopilot. He has no idea what's going on and what's happening, but then he slowly starts to remember stuff as the episode goes. And it's very interesting that they play it this way. I think this adds a lot to the tension. And of course, one of the first things he remembers is that, it's funny at first, like he thought it was a week ago because he sees that, VP or whatever. He's like, oh, I have a meeting with the VP. And it's like, no, wait a second, that was a week ago. It just shows how completely out of it he was. And again, I think this is a result of just being blacked out basically for 3 days, where apparently Mr. Robot had completely taken over. So he starts to remember that he has to, try to stop the Dark Army from doing stage 2. And what's really interesting is that he finds out that they already tried to do it at 6 a.m. that day, and they were stopped for the methods, because he said he had put stopgaps in place in order to stop them from doing it, but he realizes that they're going to try to overcome those measures and try to do it that day. And so that's from that, and this was even before the credits roll, so that's from there it sets this tone of really high tension, high stakes. And I think this is where the method of the one shot where it's following around is very motion, like just circles around, has a lot of motion to it. It really helps build that tension. It really adds to it. It works so beautiful. So this set the tone for the episode, and it was absolutely amazing following Elliot trying to put the stopgaps in place. Now, you could argue that there were a bit of slow parts, like when he was talking to Samar, his neighbor co-worker. And frankly, I found like when he was like, it was funny though, because again, it shows how out of it Elliot was, that he actually said something that he typically would say to us, the audience, and he actually said it to Samar about, oh, I have to listen to this, and it's just an indication of low self-esteem, whatever. And then that sends him off on a rant. It's like, you know what, fuck you. But then eventually it's like, you know what, you're right, I've only actually had sex twice in my life. Well, 1.5. And that's hilarious. Actually, I don't know if I buy that as being quite realistic. I don't really see someone actually who brags about having sex all the time actually admitting that so quickly. And then he goes off on a tirade, like he just loves to blah 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 talk, and saying, you know what, Elliot, now we're opening up here, let me tell you my life story. It was funny. I don't know how realistic, how much I actually buy it, but whatever. It was entertaining. But it is interesting. Seeing stuff like that. And then, of course, when Elliot was hiding from the people trying to kick him out. Now, I might be wrong, but I got the impression that the woman who was searching for him was the FBI lady who shows up and arrested all the other people. Maybe I was wrong and she wasn't with the FBI and she was working at E Corp and she just escorted the FBI people in to arrest people. Maybe she's the lady that kicks people out. I don't know. At first, like while I was watching, I thought she was with the FBI. And that sort of left a different dynamic. I'm still a bit unclear now. Maybe people would clarify that for me. But yeah, it was interesting seeing him trying to hide from them, and then he goes into that sort of business meeting in order to duck, and he sort of pretends like... It's interesting how... It was weird seeing Elliot actually pretend to be like a normal person. Like I love how... And I don't know if he can quite do it well, and I think that's just a testament to how amazing... the actor Rami Malek was in portraying that dynamic of someone pretending to be like a normal, sociable person, but not quite being able to pull it off. It's really well done in the house. He was like, "Oh, just wait a second. I'm just finishing an email. Hold on 1 second." So, I mean, that part was entertaining, but. Again, it did feel like it kind of slowed things down. That's what I was saying. It's kind of a sort of the sort of downside of doing this one continuous shot, real time sort of thing. But for the most part, I liked it. I thought it really worked, and it was really intense, high stakes. And then, of course, they actually do manage to kick Elliot out, and because they take control of the elevator and make it go down to the ground floor. So then he realizes that there's nothing he can do about it. And I like the little conversation he has with the fake Mr. Robot, which is, I don't know, that's a bit hard to get your mind around, but it's not actually Mr. Robot. It was a sort of Elliot's creating almost like a surrogate for him, because him and Mr. Robot are in such opposite polar sides now, which is why I think they never see each other anymore. So he created this other version of what Mr. Robot would say if he was on his side. So that was, yeah, it might be really weird, but I do get it, and I think that was actually really cool. From if you out of story standpoint, you can say that was the writer's excuse of putting Christian Slater in this episode, because if it wasn't for that scene, he wouldn't be in this episode, and we need Christian Slater in every episode. But I do think it did work. I did like that, and how he did that callback to the season 1, the zero-sum game, that there's no win here, that you're going to lose, there's nothing you can do about it, but Elliot still refused to give up. So it was interesting that his next move was to call the E-Corp thing, and the lady was being completely dense and obtuse, and he was like, "There's a fucking bomb in your building!" And I don't know if she's going to take that seriously. I think typically, like in real life, even if someone's joking or pranking, when someone threatens a bomb threat or says there's a bomb in your building, they're obligated to take it seriously, even if it happens a lot of times when it's just a joke or prank or whatever, but they can't, it's such a serious threat that they can't just disregard it. So maybe that will be the case. I don't know, that remains to be seen. So then he finally gets to Darlene. It was interesting because Darlene was wanting him to come down a while ago, but he was too busy trying to stop stage 2 from happening. He needed to get to this, the things in order to stop it. And, at first he's just like, I need to get back in, until Darlene just straight out says, "I'm working with the FBI." Now, it's interesting. The second time I watched this episode, I noticed before the episode starts, they play this scene from a previous episode where Dawn tells Darlene that if she tells Elliot that she's working with them, that will violate the terms of their agreement. I had actually forgotten about that. That is actually really interesting. So I'm wondering what the consequences will be for Darlene for telling Elliot about it. And again, this is amazing craft and production, like the way that they sort of did the sound where it goes as soon as Darlene says, "I'm working with the FBI," because that so puts you into Elliot's sort of mindset that he's so shocked. Like when you hear something so shocking and so such an act of betrayal that everything just seems to go out, and you're just in a state of shock. And it was so beautiful, so well done, that it was able to do that in this way and put you sort of in Elliot's mindset of what Darlene said just hit him so hard that he had to take a while to actually hear clearly what she was saying, even though she continued talking. And it was just, so well done. But so then she went on to explain everything, and then Ellie was taking a while to sort of process this, and he was saying, how dare you, I can't believe this. And it sort of ends, we sort of end Elliot's storyline there. And that kind of disappointed me, to be honest, because I thought, like, Elliot would put two and two together, and since at the moment, like, his main goal was to stop stage 2. Like, that was all his main, it was like his one purpose, one focus, nothing else mattered until Darlene was like, oh, I'm working with the FBI, and that sort of shattered that vision. But I thought that he would go back to that one purpose and be like, well, wait a second, if you're working with the FBI, why don't you tell them about the stage 2 and they can help me stop it, and that we need to get back in the building and stop it, because he even called the other people, there's a bomb in the building, whatever. Made me think that he might use them, and maybe this will happen in the next episode. I don't know, we'll see, but I kind of wish that was explored a bit more. Alright, so then this sort of, I love the way they do this. It sort of pans off and we see the protesting and reporting on it. And I love specifically, like, this is vital information where you see the reporter and they say there's been protests like this every day, but for some reason there's way more people here today and it's much more rowdy, and nobody can really tell me what's so special about today. And I think she even mentioned, like, one of the people she interviewed said something about the UN resolution being tied to it, and I'm pretty sure that particular person would be a Dark Army plan, because we know that later on we learned that some of them are Dark Army plans, but they're not all Dark Army plans. So but that explains why there's so many more people and why they're more rowdies, because there's more, the Dark Army like hired people and have their thugs there, and they're rallying up all the other people who are normally there and making them even more rowdy. So that's a very interesting little tidbit in there. So then we follow them as the rioting gets out of control, and they attack the guards, and they storm the building, and they go up, and we see that they use this guy's, key card to get up to the floor, and they start wreaking havoc. I don't really understand how all those other people got up onto different floors, if they also found people with key cards. I guess that's the way it was worked. But by the way, I have to talk about, like, and this is the motif they have with these riders in the elevator, and this is a callback to when Elliot was in the elevator earlier on. They play that weird, really weird song, that 1, 2, 3, 4. That was, again, like, the music and everything is so great. That was just so weird, and added this atmosphere of really, like, making everything not just strange but really intense. And so then led to these, you see the riders just pour out on the floor and start, like, destroying shit. Now we can extrapolate that the first riders that we see in this elevator that we follow up are Dark Army people, and that's why they're specifically going up to the floor Angela's on. And they see, other people are running away. We see other women running away screaming as these riders destroying everything, but they leave Angela alone. So I think that right there indicates that they're Dark Army and they know not to bother Angela. And then, of course, now we follow Angela's story. And this, like, I want to say this is the weaker half of the episode. I still think it's strong. I still like the continuous motion. And it's not because I have anything against Angela, because season 2 I talked a lot about how I didn't like Angela's storyline. I thought she was boring and not a very interesting character, and I was getting really sick of her deadpan stare. But in season 3, I actually like Angela more. I like what they're doing with the character, with her working with the Dark Army, and so I find her an interesting character now. So it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's more, I think one part, I was just so invested in Elliot's storyline of trying to stop stage 2 from happening. I kept wanting to go back to that. It's because that was so intense. and it wasn't really resolved, and it's obvious they're going to leave it to the next episode to be resolved, which is fine. But the whole time I was just wanting to go back to that because it was so good and so effective, and then to suddenly switch gears on that kind of, I kept wanting the camera to go back to Elliot, and it never really did for the rest of the episode. But that's okay. It was still interesting what they did with Angela. But the other thing is that we don't have the voiceover with Angela as we do with Elliot, because we have the whole monologuing, which I think actually really helped push the story along. And with Angela, it's almost, we're quiet now, and having that contrast kind of annoyed me a bit. I think it kind of slowed the episode down a little bit. But all that being said, I still did really like the stuff with Angela. Don't get me wrong. I still thought it was really intense. And it was interesting, of course. It starts off with a conversation with Irving, where Irving mentions the distraction. So this is where we get the information. It's obvious that the writers or whatever are Dark Army doing this purposely so they can do stage 2. And then we find out, of course, now it seems like, I don't think Irving knows who put in this workaround, or if he even knows that somebody in particular is trying to stop them from doing stage 2. He obviously doesn't know it's Elliot. That much is clear. But it's obvious that he talks about a snag, so it's obvious the thing that Elliot put in place to stop them, but they have a workaround. And it's funny, he tells, oh, you need to have Elliot do this, but Angela knows that Elliot is Elliot again and not Mr. Robot, so he's not going to help them at all. In fact, he's going to try to stop her, so she knows that he can't do it, so she needs to do it herself. Which I do think is really interesting, of course. But you can't tell Irving this because Irving knows nothing about the split between Mr. Robot and Elliot. And it does make me curious if the shoe is going to drop, if the Dark Army is going to find out after this incident that Mr. Robot and Elliot, or that Elliot's basically two split persons, and one of the people's actively trying to stop them from doing stage 2, where the other person's actively trying to help them, which is a big distinction. So it is going to be interesting if Irving and White Rose are going to find out about this. But so anyway, this is the part. I mean, I think it dragged a little bit where Angela is in the elevator, and this is, I say, a drawback to the real time thing, because we had to sit with Angela in the elevator and her being nervous. Now I know that the camera is pretty much in a close up, and it does like move around a lot to try to make this pause of doing nothing interesting, which I do think helps, but still it kind of slows it down a little bit. And of course we get the TV playing the stuff about the UN resolution, which is of course a very important thing, because White Rose had mentioned before that she wanted stage 2 to happen the day of the resolution thingy. So we get the thing with the security guard in the elevator, and that, again, I thought that was kind of boring. Now, when he finds out that there's something wrong with her and he's going to drag her to the safe room or whatever, I hear like a female voice says, "Over here," and then the Dark Army or the Riders, whoever, start attacking that guard. I'm pretty sure that was Angela. I'm still not completely 100%, but who else would it be? It must be Angela. But at that point, she must have assumed that those Riders were the Dark Army people, and I think she assumed correctly, since they attacked the security guy and sort of let her get away. So that was really interesting if that's the case. But then a bunch of Riders tried to attack her, and at first that was confusing to me, but they did explain this really nicely later on, that when she was talking to Irving, and she was like, "Why the hell are your people trying to attack me?" And she's like, "Well, not all of them are our people. We can light the fuse, but we don't control the explosion," which is a really nice analogy. So basically saying that some of the people were legitimate protesters that the Dark Army people were egging on to destroy stuff, but they had no sort of control over them, which makes me wonder why. It makes it seem a bit reckless, like, especially when Angela is saying, talking to her and being like, "Yeah, your distraction is a bit overkill." So she goes in and she tries to do it herself, which I think is very interesting. Now, again, this is another part where the real-time thing was slow, because it's kind of boring seeing people type on the computer. And again, they try to ramp this tension up with like music and the camera moving a lot and stuff like that. So it's okay, I guess, but usually when we see hacking stuff in Mr. Robot, it's done like cuts and montages and stuff like that, so it's not so sort of, it's really kind of boring to see it in real time. But it didn't go on for too long, so don't get me wrong, not that big of a deal. And then so basically it does leave it is kind of tension filled though, because you are wondering if Angela's going to be able to pull this off, because Irving specifically asked for Elliot to do this, and that Elliot's a genius. Like, the show is established, like, nobody can do what Elliot can do. Elliot is like top notch, like hacker computer programmer. Like, this show has made this very clear. Like, even like the best good people like Tyrell or Dom or anyone, even Angela particularly, is not as good as Elliot. So this leaves a question, it leaves a doubt in your mind, because at the end, when Irving calls her back and like, did you do it? She's like, yeah. And Irving's like, are you sure? You had to do every single thing right, otherwise it's not going to work. And so that leaves a doubt, because we know that Angela, she's good, but she's not Elliot. Nobody is Elliot good. And Elliot is basically the one she's working against, because Elliot's the one who put the safeguards in place to stop her. So it does leave a doubt in your mind of whether or not she did really accomplish it, which I really liked. I think it did add a more bit of tension to that particular scene. So then, she's caught by this other woman who goes in there to hide from the rioters, and she gets suspicious of Angela until one of the rioters attack her. And it's interesting, afterwards, Angela tells Irving about this over the phone, and he's like, oh, we'll take care of her. I'm pretty sure that means kill her. Pretty sure. And I'm pretty sure Angela wouldn't be okay with that, and you get this feeling that she's kind of not okay with that, but she has to be, because I think she purposely tries to remain ignorant. She doesn't read more into that line, oh, we'll take care of her, even though subconsciously I'm sure she knows exactly what that means, but she doesn't want to consciously acknowledge that, hey, she's just she's basically responsible for having someone else killed. But yeah, this whole thing and of her having to try to get out through the rioters, and so she puts on the mask, which is covered in mace, so it's like hurting her to wear it, and she's trying to pretend like she's another F Society rioter so they won't bother her. It kind of reminded me of like The Walking Dead, when people would smear zombie guts on themselves to pretend like they're zombies in order to walk through the zombies, but if they're caught or act out at all, then they'll instantly be killed. And that's sort of what seemed the way with Angela, that if they noticed anything out of place with her, they would start attacking her as well. But she managed to get through it, and that was really cool. Really intense, I say. So again, I'm not saying I didn't like the Angela stuff. I did. It just wasn't as intense as the Elliot stuff. But still, like stuff like that was really intense and really like good storytelling. So then she goes and then I love the sandwich guy. I think that's what we'll call him from now on, the sandwich guy. Although I'm not sure if that's actually a sandwich he's eating. I can't remember. It could be like a kebab or I don't know, but I'm pretty sure this is the same guy we saw at the end of season 2, and he's always eating a freaking sandwich. And I'm pretty sure that's meant to be from the Red Wheelbarrow. And he always just stands there and stares and eats the sandwich and doesn't say anything. And so Angela hands off the stuff to him, and he hands her a sandwich. I'm pretty sure. I mean, he hands her a paper bag. We don't know what's in it. Like, it could be computer stuff, but I'm pretty sure it's another sandwich meant for her. I think it's funnier that way, so that's how I'm gonna think about it. I love the sandwich guy, but so yeah, and then she, of course, is like completely freaked out because she just went through a riot. She had her life was at risk. She had to do this high, hacking thing, and she basically had another woman killed. And you can see this, and this is amazing acting. And again, so I don't want to bash Angela because this acting done here is absolutely amazing, and it is a change from her deadpan stare, even though it's kind of a deadpan stare here, but it's a dynamic stare. It's a different stare because you can tell the way she's walking and the music and everything that goes along with this tells how freaking freaked out she is and like ready to collapse. And it's just, again, back to the cinematography, how amazing it is. How she basically, it's following her, and we just see her, and she, boom, runs into Elliot, and is like, Angela, is there something you need to tell me? And then, boom, credits. Amazing. Amazing. Again, as I said, I would have liked to know more about the Elliot storyline, but I'm sure we'll see this next week. So that's why, I think this, I heard several people refer to this as kind of part 1, and next week will be part 2. And I definitely think that's the case. So in that terms, it's sort of hard for me to completely judge this episode until I see what resolution they're building to, how they resolve the situation in next week's episode, which, oh my god, I cannot wait for. I do get the impression that it's not going to be a single shot style type thing because, well, for one thing, they didn't say it was no commercials next week, so probably means they're not doing it. And plus, I don't think they'd be able to swing it with USA to do no commercials 2 weeks in a row. That would be probably too much. And I'm fine with them switching back to a normal style for next week, and I kind of hope that they do, even though it works so well for this episode. But yeah, that was an absolutely amazing ending. Even though I wanted to see more of what Elliot was up to, what I'm really hoping is that we'll get to that next week. Is that next week will start where they left off with the Elliot storyline, where we'll see him continuing to talk to Darlene and go back into the building. Because the whole time when we're following the writers, I'm like, Elliot's going to go back in the building, because now that he's talking over and over again how he needs to go back, and now these writers basically open an opportunity for him to get back, because everything's chaos and security's not going to be able to stop him anymore. And of course we see that is the case, because we see him back on the floor that Angela's in. And I'm not sure, is that the floor he needed to get to stop the program? I'm not sure if that was. I don't know. Maybe someone will tell me for certain. But it's interesting how, and maybe he was up to stopping her at the same time she was putting those safeguards in place. Maybe he was doing something that would actually stop stage 2 even more. So I'm actually still don't know if stage 2 is going to happen or not. Who's going to win? Is it going to be the Dark Army? Is it going to be Elliot? What's going to happen? And if Elliot does win, what are going to be the consequences of that? And I'll get into the promo a little bit, and the promo is very short, so it doesn't really give much away, which I love. I love the fact that they don't give that much away from next week's episode. It's all still up in the air. But the one thing it does sort of show is it shows Dom talking about what attack. Now, that could be misdirection, but it does lead me to think that she is being brought up to speed about the potential, stage 2 building blowing up, which I think she should be, quite frankly. I hope that's the case, but maybe it's not. But I'm thinking maybe Elliot tells Darlene about it, and then so Darlene will tell Dom about it to try to get them to stop it. So yeah, everything's still up in the air. It's still really tense. I wanted to see more in this episode, but again, I love how they're pacing this season. The way they're pacing this season is amazing. I almost wish I would have waited till the end till the season was over and binge it all at once, because it'd probably be more enjoyable that way. But I can't fucking wait that long. I want it now, and especially it's so good. So anyway, my rating out of 10 for Runtime Error is a 10, the best. Amazing episode, even though, as I said, at times it was a bit slow paced, especially with the Angela stuff, but that's really overshadowed. That's really such a minor thing. It doesn't matter, because everything about this episode was beautifully crafted, beautifully created. The way they did the one-shot thing was one of the best uses I've ever seen of it. It's like right up there with Birdman, and the music, the way they did it with Elliot, and they combined it with the acting and seeing Angela, her acting, and it was just such. So the promos weren't lying. This was an epic episode, absolutely amazing, and next week's episode has the potential to be just as good, and I just cannot wait. The season 3 has been so amazing so far. Anyway, that's it for my review of Runtime Error. Be sure to check me out next week as I continue to cover episodes of Mr. Robot. And also have an announcement. I will be doing a live discussion video with my brother Epkin Tomko. He has his channel Epkin Tomko. I will be doing a live discussion video here on Enchantment of Eternity tomorrow evening sometime in the U.S. Specific time is still yet to be determined, but once we determine the specific time, I'll put a link in the description below to the live event, and it will tell you what time it's going. But it will be evening time for the U.S., probably between 6 and 9 or whatever. We're going to talk about the first half of season 3 of Mr. Robot. So the entire first half, we'll go through, give our impressions. It'll be interesting because Afghan hasn't made very many videos about Mr. Robot, and we haven't really touched base on it. So I'm not sure what he thinks. So it'll be interesting. We'll flesh it out and really get into the first half of season 3, which I personally think has been amazing. So be sure to check that out. Also, be sure to check out my channel as I do many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Expanse, Discovery, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.